Hello, this is Angela with Parker's Permaculture. I'm back for a bonus video this afternoon because I was up at 3 a.m. and I weighed in on a post in my alumni Facebook group that was about the current formula crisis here in the United States, how we have a significant shortage of commercial infant formula. And the person who posted asked, what else can we do to help feed these kids? What are our other options? And obviously, I breastfed 4 children. I used to be a WIC breastfeeding counselor, and I have a little bit of experience and a lot of opinions about what we should be doing to support our mothers and our infants in this period of significant shortage of food for them. Because I weighed in this thread at 3 a.m., the algorithm has decided to now show me a bazillion posts on this subject. And I keep seeing lots and lots of recipes for homemade formula, seeing it as either buck the government, buck corporate enterprise, buck the whole formula industry, and back to earth kind of natural living, make your own formula at home. And I want to say, dear God, please don't do that. Please do not do that. That is awful, awful advice. And I'll get into why in a minute. But first I want to address, this is a permaculture channel. We talk about earth care, people care, and fair share. How is this current issue of the industrial formula shortage in America applicable to permaculture? Well, I would say very easily permaculture is applicable to that conversation. We need to approach it with earth care, people care, and the concept of fair share, particularly in the way that people talk about mothers and babies who either have to or have chosen to use formula. We need to have people care. We need to engage with empathy and meet people where they're at and help them solve their immediate needs. We also need to look at the broader systemic issues that don't care for the earth and don't care for people and prioritize corporate profit above the well-being of children and mothers. So I'll get to that in a minute. But all of that is why I feel that even though this is a permaculture channel, I want to weigh in on this subject because I feel that it all is interconnected. So there are these ads and posts on social media that put things up like 1940s or 1960s recipes for homemade baby milk formula. And there are things like Caro corn syrup, a vitamin tablet, and cow's milk. There are more modern day versions that are put up by wellness gurus or folks who are really into like green living, or maybe even I've seen goat farmers who think that they can speak to the very complicated and nuanced issue of infant nutrition. Commercial infant formula has been produced for a really long time, and we still cannot replicate everything that's in breast milk, not even come close. So to think that you can just mix up some stuff in your kitchen because someone told you to on their social media posts that they have monetized and are trying to make money off of and gain attention from, or because someone has said, this is something that my great-grandma was fed and therefore it's good and old-timey and it'll be right for my kids. Don't do that. Again, the composition of human breast milk is fascinating and actually fluctuates day to day and month to month based on the needs of the infant. Formula is an approximation of it. Stuff you mix up in your kitchen cannot come even close. If you are tempted to YOLO it with your infant's food, please Google kwashiorkor, pellagra, beriberi, cow's milk anemia, protein energy malnutrition, osteomalacia. The list is long of significant health problems that happen when kids, especially infants, kids, or even adults, are malnourished and do not get the basic components that they need in order to thrive. Infants are undergoing rapid brain development, rapid physical development, and you don't want to screw around with the nutrition that children need. Don't do that. You are not being more self-sufficient. You are not being more resilient if you mix up some stuff on your stove and feed it to your baby. You are asking for health problems. You're asking for long-term consequences. Please don't do that. So the UN recommends that there is a hierarchy for ways that we should feed infants. Number 1 is mother breastfeeds her child. Number 2 is if she's unable to breastfeed her child, that a wet nurse is provided to breastfeed that child. These are because there are significant benefits to the physical relationship that occurs with breastfeeding, both in the physiological development of muscles and articulation of the mouth, the psychological benefits, the health benefits for the woman who is nursing, and the health benefits for the child. If a child cannot be breastfed by its mother or provided a wet nurse, the third option is pumped human milk from a milk bank, which is horrendously expensive. It can exceed $9 an ounce here in the United States easily. The fourth option is commercial infant formula, which has been carefully formulated to, as best as it can, approximate human milk. All of these ways are considered safe and acceptable ways to feed a child under the right circumstances, an infant under the right circumstances. I'll use child and infant interchangeably because in most of the world, the average age of ecological weaning is between 4 and 6, and it's a modern notion that kids are breastfed for just 6 months. All of my kids were weaned between 26 months and 3.5 years old. Just because there is a hierarchical system set up by the UN, and just because there are advantages to breastfeeding, that does not mean any of us need to smugly get on our high horse and say, well, I wouldn't be struggling in the infant formula shortage because I breastfeed, or I did breastfeed. Well, if those moms hadn't wanted to face an infant formula shortage, they should have just breastfed their kids. Please don't do that either. We have a responsibility to extend people care and empathy to people who are stressed the heck out right now about trying to feed their babies. And it does nothing to relieve that stress and that burden to get smug and say, the answer is breastfeeding. Yes, breastfeeding is a sustainable practice. In permaculture, we should argue that women should have every opportunity to be supported and cared for and empowered to breastfeed their children. There are lots and lots of legitimate reasons, and reasons that we don't get to decide if they're legitimate or not, that people need to formula feed. But that means that we do not shame parents who formula feed their children. We don't shame children who are fed formula. While we extend empathy and try and solve the immediate crisis, we can also at the same time criticize the system that has produced this current crisis. It's not the way it should be, and it's the reality because of unethical marketing practices and a profit-driven industry of formula. Companies that are fraught with ethical issues because they knowingly exploit mothers and infants, particularly in developing nations, for profit. We live in a society in which every single flipping barrier is put up for mothers who try to breastfeed in the first place. Someone tried to throw me out of the St. Louis library when I was breastfeeding my first child at 5 months old, even though that right is supported by state law, even in Missouri, even 19 years ago. There's so much stigma and sexualization of women who breastfeed their children that is just ridiculous and makes it that much harder for them to breastfeed. We have no paid maternity leave in the US. We have no period of time under which women are cared for and supported so that they can bond with their baby and create a strong mother-baby dyad that lends itself to establishing a good breastfeeding relationship. We have free infant formula samples that are given out. And this is where one of the reasons that we boycott Nestle and many of the companies, including Abbott, which is the current source of the shortage, they give just enough free formula samples to mothers, just long enough, actually carefully timed, so that the mom's milk dries up just in time for the formula to run out. They're told formula is more scientific, it's more modern, it's more advanced, it's better for your baby. It is more empowered. It is more modest. And there are all of these reasons that you should formula feed your baby, and we'll give you just enough to get your baby hooked on formula, difficult for them to latch, and then your milk to dry up. Once it dries up, you're now stuck buying our formula. And in developing nations, families can spend as much as 50% of their take-home income buying formula, which results in them needing to water it down because they have no other opportunity, and that results in childhood malnutrition. 1.5 million infants a year die as a result of malnutrition, most of which can be linked to the fact that their parents have to water down their formula because they have been hooked by a formula company that wants to exploit them for profit, and they spend an astounding amount of their income on a food source for their children when they could have been able to feed their kids for free if the community had supported them and if the industry had not targeted and exploited them in the first place. Let's also not forget that millions more children die every year from diarrheal diseases. Many of those, the majority of those, can be linked to tainted water. Powdered formula must be mixed with water. Lots of these kids do not have a clean water supply. The formula company says you should mix your formula with distilled water. Tell me where in developing nations these families who already spend 50% of their income on formula can then afford to buy distilled water to feed their babies. It's horribly corrupt. It's horribly distressing. It's horribly against earth care and people care and fair share. It's not sustainable, and it's not okay that in a profit-driven consumer culture, which I actually just made a video about this morning, in a profit-driven consumer culture, we're exploiting mothers, we're exploiting impoverished families, we're exploiting infants, and babies are dying as a result of it. And mothers are being deprived of the opportunity to have the wonderful relationship of breastfeeding their child, which imparts health benefits to the mother as well. So we can criticize the system, we can criticize the corporations that exploit people and the planet in order to reap a profit off of formula, but that in no way means we should be shaming mothers or babies. We should not be shaming people that are trapped in a society that devalues breastfeeding, shames women for breastfeeding, creates all kinds of barriers, no leave, lots of cultural pressure to formula feed, lots of cultural pressure to separate the mother-baby dyad and not support it, not to support women in their careers if they choose to breastfeed at the same time, making women pump in their cars if they are trying to work and breastfeed at the same time. We have all of these ways in which we harm the relationship, systemic problems. And in permaculture, we talk about designing resilient systems, designing ethical systems. The current system that we have in America and in much of the world in terms of allowing corporations to behave unethically and having an entire culture that is oppressive and harmful to mothers and babies, not just for breastfeeding, but in all kinds of ways. That's not resilient design. That is not ethical design. And it has led to situations like the one we're in right now, where 65% of our infants are dependent on formula, which is not evolutionarily how it is supposed to be at all. So when you're looking at 65% of kids who need formula, and you're looking at a huge formula shortage, which is the result of a for-profit business deciding to not have good hygiene practices, and 2 babies have died so far, and many were sickened because of bacterial contamination in formula, which it does no good to be like, wouldn't have happened if they were breastfeeding. Like, again, don't be that person. Children have died from this, and more children and their families are struggling to find sufficient quantities of food for them right now. We should in every way, shape, and form be criticizing the system that has created and perpetuated these really unsustainable and harmful dynamics where we have a crisis now as a result. Keep in mind, for folks in developing nations, sourcing formula and being able to afford it is kind of a perpetual crisis during infancy because we have let corporations exploit mothers and babies. Number 1, don't follow recipes on the internet for making breast milk substitutes. Number 2, don't shame mothers and babies. Don't use this as an opportunity to grandstand about breastfeeding. Number 3, don't feel that because we are supporting mothers and babies, we can't speak out about corporations and the flawed dynamic in our culture that has led to the crisis that we are in, where we have prioritized profit over supporting mothers and their children. We can carefully and properly feed our babies in a healthy way. We can support folks who need to or choose to feed with formula and not shame them. And while we support individuals and help them meet their immediate needs, we can work to reform the system long-term. All 3 of these things can exist in harmony with each other and without tension, without conflict, and they should. I'm getting really tired of the whole notion that you cannot critique or seek to change and reform and create equitable systems that don't harm people, particularly our most vulnerable people like infants, or you are shaming individuals. I'm sick of that argument. That is a false narrative. It is used to silence people who want to reform the system and want to create a more just system. You absolutely can critique the system, and you should, because critiquing the system is a way that we create change that helps folks down the road, that helps individuals down the road. But at the same time, don't critique the system and let that slide into purposeless, smug shaming of individuals. Think about what our goal is. If our goal is harm reduction and help, the way we go after corporations cannot be passed off into going after individuals. We have to support individuals. That's why we want to reform the system, so that we can support all individuals. We all need to be united in our care and empathy for each other. If we want to have people care, then our people care must reform the system, and it must not bring down and shame individuals. The system has failed mothers and babies. Mothers have not failed. If you're a mom and you use formula, you have not failed your child. There should be no guilt or condemnation for you. Our desire for change and our desire to want better needs to be focused on the system. We need to figure out how to better support moms and babies. We need to better figure out how to create a resilient world in which we prioritize actual people care above profit. We need to create a world in which we are not sexualizing women for their basic biological functions like feeding babies. We support mothers and make it possible for them to feed their children. Our whole society can do better when it comes to education and support for breastfeeding mothers and building up a resilient food chain in which infants who need formula have it, mothers who want to breastfeed feel empowered and are supported in doing so. And that leads to greater resilience for everybody, increased health outcomes for mothers and babies, increased quality of life for everybody. Let's stop prioritizing industry profit that exploits the most vulnerable folks on our planet, low income, mothers, tiny infants. And let's think about making a better world. Right now, let's think about how do we feed the kids that are hungry? How do we fix our current supply chain issues? How do we make sure that the formula that's produced in America is not killing babies through bacterial contamination? And then let's seek to reform the system at the same time, all while extending empathy and care and love to each other. Thanks.